There is a kind of fear that does not announce itself. It does not come with thunder or the howl of a wolf pack at midnight. It does not arrive in the shape of an army on the horizon or the sound of war drums shaking the valley floor. This fear is quieter than all of those things, more patient, more precise. It lives in the chest of powerful men not because they are in danger, but because somewhere, in a village they have never visited, a child they have never seen is drawing her first breath, and that breath, that single unremarkable inhalation of cold morning air, is the beginning of their end. King Aldrich the Grey had ruled for 42 years. He had done so with a fist that did not open and a will that did not bend, and in that time he had consumed 11 territories, broken 4 rival packs, leveled 2 villages that had the poor judgment to resist him, and earned himself a collection of names: the Grey King, the Iron Fang, the Consuming Dark, that he wore like medals and had issued to no one else. He was old now, as kings who survive long enough eventually become, his black hair long gone to white, his body slower than it had been, his power still enormous and his patience very, very thin. He had ruled 42 years, and for 30 of them, he had been afraid. It was a prophecy, as these things usually are. Prophecies have a particular gift for finding the one man with the one weakness and pressing directly on it, not because the universe is cruel, though it often is, but because prophecies are not warnings. They are receipts. They are the universe confirming, in advance, what the man already knows about himself. What he has always known. The thing he built his entire empire to keep from being true. The oracle had been a girl, barely 16, small and quiet, with the eyes of someone who had already seen more than they should, blind in one eye even then, the left one filmed with white, the right one clear and dark and terribly knowing. She had spoken the prophecy in the throne room, in front of the full court, in a voice that had no business coming from a body that young. She had said, "An Omega will be born in the Forgotten Valley, in the season of the second frost. She will know nothing of herself, and everything of the wild. She will be stripped bare and come back whole. She will walk into the dark and carry fire. And on the day she stands at the foot of your throne, Grey King, you will understand that all your years of taking were only ever practice for the moment you lost everything." He had ordered her killed before the last word was out of her mouth. She ran. He never found her. And 30 years later, sitting on a throne built from the bones of his conquests, surrounded by the territories he had bled dry and the people he had broken, and the Omega girls he had stripped of their birthright before they were old enough to understand what they had lost, King Aldrich the Grey was still afraid. Because prophecies do not wait for permission. And the girl they spoke of had already been born. The village of Ashenford sat at the southern edge of the Forgotten Valley like something the world had put down and failed to pick back up. It was not a remarkable place. It had a mill, a market square, a temple to the moon that had seen better decades, and roughly 400 souls who had learned, in the way that people under occupation learn things, how to make themselves very small and very quiet and very difficult to notice. The Grey King's banners hung at the village gate, iron gray, the wolf crest in black, the crown above it like a wound. They had hung there for 20 years. The cloth had faded. No one replaced it. Replacing it would have suggested there was something worth maintaining. The people of Ashenford did not make trouble. They had learned what happened to villages that made trouble. Which was why, on the night that Marin Solveig gave birth to not one but 2 daughters in the back room of the house on the edge of the market square, the first thing the midwife said, before she had fully processed what she was looking at, was not congratulations. It was, "Hide one." Marin was 31 years old, a weaver's wife, a woman with soil-dark skin and steady hands, and the kind of quiet ferocity that people who have spent a decade under an oppressive king develop in place of everything they were not allowed to say out loud. She looked at the midwife. She looked at her husband, Edric, standing in the corner with the expression of a man who had just been handed far more than he had ordered. She looked at the two small, furious, red-faced creatures making their displeasure known to the universe. She understood immediately. Twin Omegas. Two Omega girls in one birth, in a village where the king's mages were due to arrive at dawn to conduct their quarterly inspection of all infants born in the last 3 months. Two Omega girls whose power had not yet been catalogued, not yet stripped, not yet rendered harmless by the Grey King's law. Two Omega girls who, by morning, had to become one. Edric moved first. He always moved first when Mare needed him to. He went to the far wall, to the loose stone at the base of the hearth, and he pulled it back to reveal the small passage room they had built there 3 years ago when the mages had started making their inspections monthly instead of seasonally. They had built it for storage. They had not known what they were building it for. He lined it with blankets and a small covered lamp and a cloth soaked in milk. The smaller twin, younger by 4 minutes, quieter by a considerable margin, with a mouth already shaped like a question, went into the passage room. The larger twin stayed. The midwife, a woman named Hesta, who had lived in Ashenford for 60 years and had learned to carry other people's secrets the way some women carry prayers, left before dawn and told no one anything. The mages arrived at sunrise. There was one infant as far as they could determine. A girl. Standard Omega signature. Nothing unusual. The senior mage performed the stripping with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done the same thing so many times it no longer requires attention, a touch to the temples, a word in the old tongue, the brief visible flicker of something leaving the child's body like heat off summer stone. He noted it in the ledger. 1 Omega female, village of Ashenford, power neutralized. He and his guards were gone before the morning market opened. In the passage room beneath the hearth, the younger twins slept. They named the one who had stayed Saren. They named the one in the passage room Aelith. For 4 years, this is how the world was. Saren, above, learning to walk on solid floors, to eat at the table, to know the smell of rain and the sound of the market and the texture of her mother's hand. Aelith, below, learning the same things through narrower channels, books that her mother brought her, small foods passed through the gap, the warmth of the lamp, her father's voice reading to her in the evenings about things she could not yet see. They did not tell her about her sister. They did not know how. They were not certain it was the right thing. They told themselves they would, when she was older, when it was safe, when the right words existed for a thing that had no right words at all. Then, on a late autumn evening in the year that Saren turned 4, the girl who had stayed came down with a fever. It moved fast. The way fevers do, in children in that age, not giving the body time to adjust or the parents time to prepare, or the village healer time to arrive with anything useful. Saren was gone in 3 days. Marin and Edric buried her at the edge of the village in the place where the soil was soft, under a stone that had no name carved on it, because a named stone could be found, and a found stone could lead to questions, and questions were the one thing they could not afford. They grieved in the passage room, below the house, with the lamp lit and their daughter, who did not know she had lost the only person in the world who was exactly like her. Then they opened the door. "Come up," Edric said. His voice was steady. It had cost him a great deal to make it steady. Aelith was 4 years old, with eyes the color of new copper and a mass of dark hair that had not yet decided what shape it wanted to be. She came up through the passage into the house with the cautious deliberateness of someone entering a room they have only ever imagined, and she stood in the middle of the kitchen floor, and she looked at the ceiling and the walls and the window and the gray morning light coming through it, and she said, with the calm matter-of-factness of a 4-year-old who has spent 4 years underground and therefore finds most things above it remarkable, "It's bigger than the stories." Maren pulled her into her arms and held her for a long time. Edric went outside and stood in the cold and let himself fall apart for exactly 5 minutes, and then he put himself back together and came inside and made breakfast. That was the day Aelith Solveig met the world. The world, it would discover, had never met anything quite like her. Before we continue, I'd like you to let me know in the comment section where you are currently watching this story from. Also, do not forget to like and hit the subscribe button for more interesting werewolf romance stories.
She grew.
This is the thing that children do in general, but Aelith did it with a particular specificity that her parents found equal parts wonderful and deeply, deeply alarming. By 6, she had befriended every child on the lane, 3 of the neighbors' dogs, and a fox that appeared to have made a unilateral decision about whose house it was going to sleep outside of. By 7, she had climbed every climbable thing in the village, and several things that were not technically climbable. By 8, she had her first fight, with a boy 2 years her senior, who had said something cutting to one of the younger children in the market square, and won it with a decisiveness that the boy would not discuss publicly for the rest of his life. Maren and Edric had been raising her on books and gentleness, and the careful cultivation of the kind of girl who is invisible, forgettable, unremarkable. A girl who sat quietly and read and helped with the weaving and kept her eyes down and gave the Grey King's patrols no reason to look twice. This was as strategies went not going well. The problem was not that Aelith was disobedient. The problem was that she was disobedient in ways that were entirely coherent and internally consistent with the person she actually was, which made arguing with her significantly more difficult than if she had simply been stubborn. She would sit and read 3 books at a time, cross-referenced, because apparently reading 1 book at a time was for people without questions. She would help with the weaving, and in the same hour reorganize the entire storage room by material density and thread count, because this is more efficient, and I don't understand why we were doing it the other way. She kept her eyes down around the king's patrols, reliably and without complaint. But she also sparred with the pack warriors on the village training ground every morning before the patrols arrived, and she went into the Greymore Forest, where grown men of the pack made excuses not to go, and where the trees were so old and so tall they blocked out the sky like a second ceiling. And she came back with more game than warriors twice her age, and a composure that suggested she had found the experience pleasant and was looking forward to doing it again. She had no idea she still had her power. This was the thing that kept Maren and Edric awake at night. The stripping ceremony that the mages had performed had been intended for 1 child, and they had performed it on Saren. Aelith had been in the passage room. Her power was intact, dormant, vast, sitting inside her like a fire banked beneath stone, untouched, unknown, waiting. And it was beginning in small ways to show. The game she caught was always clean. The wounds she collected from sparring healed faster than they should. When she was very still and very focused, which she was sometimes, in the early morning when the light came sideways through the kitchen window, the air around her seemed to do something. Something slight. Something that Edric noticed, but did not name, and Maren noticed, and prayed nobody else did. Something was waking up. Slowly. On its own schedule. Without her permission or knowledge. They tried locking her in. She learned which windows had loose frames. They tried restricting her to the market district. She found 3 alternative routes to the training ground. They tried asking her, plainly, to stop, to be less, to do less, to stay smaller, and she looked at them with those copper eyes and said, with a gentleness that was somehow worse than argument, "I know you love me. I know you're scared. But I don't know what you're scared of, and I don't know why the thing I am is the dangerous thing, and you won't tell me." They didn't. They couldn't. They had made this decision when she was in the passage room, and they had made it for the best of reasons, and it had become a wall so high and old that neither of them knew anymore how to find the door in it. So they stayed on their side of it, and she stayed on hers, and the love between them, which was real, enormous, incapable of doubt, passed back and forth through the cracks in the silence, imperfect and fierce, and not quite enough. She was 17 when it finally broke. It was a spring evening, the kind that smells of wet earth and new growth, and the particular restlessness that comes to people who have been kept still too long. Aelith had come back from the forest with a full pack and a cut on her arm from a branch she hadn't seen, and Edric had seen the cut before she had cleaned it and had said, not unkindly, but with a tightness in his voice that she had been learning to read and never learning to accept, that she needed to stop going to the forest, that it was too dangerous, that she was too visible, that she was going to get herself killed. She had looked at the cut. It had already stopped bleeding. It was already, in the barely perceptible way that things did around her, beginning to close. It's just a scratch, she said. It's not about the scratch, Aelith. Then what is it about, Father? Because I would genuinely like to know. And there it was. The question she had been asking for years, in 100 forms, in 100 tones, in patience and in frustration and in quiet and in the raised voice she almost never used. The question they had never answered. The door they had never opened. Edric closed his eyes. Marin, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, pressed her hand to her mouth. You are not safe, he said. That is what it is about. You are not safe, and everything you do, the forest, the warriors, the hunting, the fighting, the way you exist at a volume the entire village can hear, every single thing brings us closer to the day when something terrible happens. We are trying to protect you. You are trying to keep me locked away, she said. You are trying to make me into something smaller than I am, so that whatever you're afraid of cannot find me. And I am telling you, I have been telling you for years, that I am not afraid of whatever it is you're afraid of, and I will not keep shrinking myself for a danger that you will not even name to me. Aelith. I am not a child in a passage room anymore. The silence after that was the particular quality of silence that follows something that has been kept too long. Edric sat down heavily in the chair by the fire. Marin had come fully into the kitchen now. Neither of them spoke. The fire cracked and settled. Aelith looked at them, at these two people who had raised her, who had loved her ferociously and imperfectly and entirely, who had made a decision before she was old enough to be consulted and had been carrying it alone ever since, and she felt, alongside the anger, something that was almost grief. I love you, she said. Both of you. But I cannot keep living like this. She went to her room. She packed what she needed. She had packed it before, in her head, many times. She knew exactly what would fit in the hunting pack and what she could move without, and where the heaviest things were. It took her 6 minutes. She was quiet on the stairs. She was already at the door before Edric called after her. Aelith. She stopped. Come back, he said. His voice was stripped of everything except what was true. Please. She turned just enough to look at him over her shoulder. When you decide to tell me the truth, she said, I will come back. And she walked out into the dark. Chapter 2. The Greymore Forest was different at night. She had been in it at night before, moonlit hunts, early mornings that crossed into pre-dawn, but she had never been in it the way she was now, alone, and with no intention of turning back, walking without a destination except away. The trees here were ageless in the way that only very old living things are ageless, beyond counting, their roots so deep and so tangled that the ground moved slightly underfoot in places, breathing. Things moved in the dark at the edges of her vision. Owls. Deer. Something larger and slower that kept pace with her for a quarter mile and then decided she was not interesting enough to pursue. She walked for 2 hours before she saw the light. It was not fire, exactly. Not lantern light. It came from between the stones of what appeared to be the ruin of a temple, old enough that the original structure had fallen and been grown over, and then partially reclaimed, and then grown over again, a layered history of building and collapse and patient natural reclamation. One wall stood whole. Two stood partial. The roof was gone, and in its place was an opening to the sky, and through that opening the moon poured down with her usual lack of restraint, and in that moonlight, inside the half-ruined temple, something shone. Aelith stopped at the threshold.
"Come in," said a voice.
"You look like someone trying to decide whether the terrifying thing is worth investigating. In my experience, it always is." The voice belonged to an old woman sitting on a flat stone near what had once been the temple's altar. She was very old, the kind of old that stops having a specific age and simply becomes a category, a state of having been in the world long enough to outlast most of the things that tried to stop her. Her left eye was filmed with white. Her right eye was clear and dark and looking directly at Aelith with an expression of recognition so complete and uncomplicated that it was, somehow, more unsettling than if she had been surprised. "You were expecting me," Aelith said. "I was expecting you eventually," the woman said. "Sit down. You've walked a long way in a temper, and your legs know it even if you don't." Aelith sat. Not because she was told to, she was not, as a rule, a person who did things because she was told to, but because something in the woman's voice made argument seem like a waste of effort she could be spending on more useful things. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Vera," the woman said. "A long time ago, I was a prophet. Before that, I was a girl not entirely unlike yourself, which is to say a person who knew something important and was kept from knowing it by people who loved her and were afraid. After the prophecy, I was hunted. After the hunting, I was this." She gestured at herself, at the temple, at the general landscape of an old woman living in a ruin in the middle of a forest that frightened everyone else. "What prophecy?" Vera was quiet for a moment. The moon came down through the open roof and laid itself across the altar stone and the floor between them. "I will tell you," she said. "And it is going to be very difficult to hear. And you're going to resist it, which is your nature and is not a flaw, and then eventually you are going to accept it, which will also be your nature. And when you are ready to stop resisting and start asking me what to do next, I will be here."
She paused.
"I've been here 30 years waiting to say this. I can wait a little longer for you to catch up." "You are not instilling confidence," Aelith said. "I'm not here to instill confidence. I'm here to tell you who you are." She told her. All of it. The prophecy. First, the exact words of it, which Vera had spoken once in a throne room 30 years ago and had not spoken aloud since, and which came out of her now in the voice of the girl she had been, carrying the weight they had always carried, heavier for the waiting. An Omega will be born in the Forgotten Valley. She will know nothing of herself and everything of the wild. She will be stripped bare and come back whole. She will walk into the dark and carry fire. Then the night of Aelith's birth, the midwife's instruction, the passage room, the twin who had stayed, who had been stripped of her power, who had died at 4 years old and been buried under a stone with no name. Then the full truth of what Aelith carried, not what had been taken from her, as she had believed her whole life, but what had never been taken at all. The power entire and intact and waiting, a thing of Omega birthright that the Grey King's mages had reached for and closed on nothing, because they had been reaching for the wrong child. Aelith listened. She was very quiet. When Vera finished, the silence stretched for a long time. "I have a twin," Aelith said. Not a question. The flattest possible way to say a thing. "You had a twin," Vera said gently. Another long silence. "I was in the passage room." "Yes." "My whole life, the hunting, the forest, the training, I thought I was doing it because of what I am. Because I just wanted it. But it was the power. It was already there. I just didn't know it." Both things can be true, Vera said. The power is you. It is not separate from you. It did not make you who you are. It recognized you as you already were and settled in accordingly. Aelith looked at her hands. They were the hands of someone who had spent years hunting and sparring and hauling and climbing, calloused, capable, familiar. They looked exactly the same as they had this morning. I don't feel any different, she said. You won't, Vera said. Not until you use it. Not until someone shows you what it actually is. A beat. I suppose that someone is you, Aelith said. For the beginning, Vera said. Yes. She stayed. She had not planned to stay. She had planned to walk until she reached the edge of herself and then figure out what came next. But the temple had a room in its south wall, small, intact, with a door that still closed, and Vera had food enough for two and a fire that she maintained with the focused competence of someone who had been keeping fires going alone for 3 decades. And when morning came and Aelith did not leave, neither of them discussed it. The first 3 days were for processing. She sat in the moonlit ruin, and she thought about the passage room, about the girl she had never met, about the scar of an answer to every question she had ever asked her parents and never received. She thought about Edric sitting by the fire, stripped of everything except what was true. She thought about Marin pressing her hand to her mouth. She had not, until now, understood the full weight of what they had been carrying. She did not stop being angry about the choice they had made. But she was now capable of holding the anger and the grief and the love all together in the same room inside her chest, which was perhaps the most grown-up thing she had ever done. On the 4th day, she told Vera she was ready. Vera, who had been waiting with the patience of someone who had had 30 years to practice it, said, "Good." And then she made her stand barefoot in the rain for 4 hours. "This is training," Aelith said. On hour 3, water running freely down her face and neck and into her collar. "This is attention," Vera said, entirely dry beneath the one intact section of roof. "You have spent your whole life moving. Moving is excellent. Moving is half of what you are. But the other half is stillness. And you don't know the stillness yet. I know stillness. You know waiting. That's different." Aelith stood in the rain and thought about the difference between waiting and stillness for the remainder of the hour. By the end, she thought she understood it. She was not going to admit this out loud. "Again tomorrow?" she said. "We'll see," said Vera, which meant yes. The power came slowly at first. Not with drama. Not with fire and sound and the spectacular eruption of something suppressed. It came the way growing things come, incrementally in the dark, as a process rather than an event. She was standing in the forest on the morning of the 8th day when she reached for something she did not have a name for and found it there. It was like pressing her hand against a wall and discovering for the first time that the wall was actually a door. She stood very still. The door did not open, but it was there. "Good," Vera said behind her. "Now remember where it is." By the 2nd week, she could find it reliably. By the 3rd, she could open it deliberately, a small amount, a controlled amount, enough to do specific things. Sharpen her senses past the ordinary wolf range, call the deep steadiness that sped her healing, feel the thread of connection that ran between herself and the living world around her in a way that was not sight but was not nothing. It was, she told Vera, hunting for the word, like knowing the shape of a room in complete darkness.
Not seeing it.
Knowing it. Yes, Vera said. That is exactly it. She was a quick student. She was also, as Vera observed on several occasions with the tone of someone revising a prior estimate, an absolutely merciless sparring partner. "You're 70 years old," Aelith said one afternoon when Vera had bested her for the third consecutive time with a fighting style that appeared to involve very little movement and an unreasonable amount of patience.
How?
I'm 71, Vera said, and I've had 30 years of nothing else to practice. That's irritating. Most useful things are. On the last night of the 4th week, Vera sat across the fire from her and said the things she had been building toward for a month. There is a man, she said. Aelith looked up from the fire. On the other side of the Ironback mountain range. His name is Selim Reese. He is an alpha, the alpha actually of the mountain pack. Small pack, but exceptionally disciplined. Exceptionally trained. She paused. He is also, by all reliable accounts, extremely difficult. Difficult how? Arrogant.
Stubborn.
Set in his thinking. Has views about women that belong to a century they haven't reached yet, and I doubt very much he will be happy to receive you. Aelith considered this. But he'll help. He is the only one who can. The Mountain Pack holds the only remaining alliance network that predates the Grey King's conquest. They know the interior fortresses, the supply routes, the old tunnels that the King's armies don't know exist. Without him, you are powerful and alone. With him, Vera paused again. With him, you have a war. Another silence. You said he'll be difficult, Aelith said. What exactly does that mean? Vera looked at her with the expression of someone who has very carefully chosen not to laugh. It means, she said, that you are going to need every bit as much patience as I've spent the last month trying to teach you. I have excellent patience. You have, Vera said with perfect precision, excellent patience for things that deserve it. The question is whether you can extend it to things that do not. Aelith looked back at the fire. He'd better be worth the walk, she said. Chapter 3. The Ironback Mountains were not mountains in the gentle sense. They were not scenic. They were not the kind of formation that invited contemplation or inspired the picturesque. They were raw and hostile and vertical in the way that things are when they have never been asked to accommodate anything. Rock faces that made no concessions to footing, wind that came from directions that should not have been possible, altitude that thinned the air enough to remind lungs that they were not universal constants. She climbed for 2 days. She slept in a crevice on the second night and was woken at dawn by something that turned out to be a mountain goat, which she had not known existed before this moment and found, frankly, baffling. The settlement was on the north face. She had expected something crude, a cluster of rough-built structures, a pack living at subsistence in the cold. What she found was organized, efficient, and heavily fortified in ways that were designed to look natural to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Walls built from the mountain's own stone. Sightlines cleared on all approaches. Sentinels positioned. She counted 6 before she was close enough to be challenged, which meant there were likely 12, in places that used the terrain with a sophistication that suggested someone had spent a great deal of time thinking about how to defend this position. She stopped when the first sentry challenge came, 20 feet before the outer perimeter, from a voice that appeared to belong to someone standing on a ledge she could not see. State your name and your pack and your purpose. Aelith Solveig, she said. No pack. I need to speak with Selim Reese. A brief pause. The Alpha does not see unsolicited visitors. Tell him the Omega from the Forgotten Valley is here. Tell him the prophecy is already in motion. And tell him, she added, because some things are worth saying clearly from the beginning, that I'm going to stand right here until he comes out, so the only question is whether he wants to have this conversation now or after we've both had a very long and unreasonable amount of time to think about it. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, wait. She waited. He appeared 20 minutes later. She had been given no description of Selim Reese, and Vera had offered none beyond the functional. Alpha, mountain pack, difficult. What stood before her now was a man roughly 10 years her senior, built like the mountain itself, had decided to make a person, tall, heavy with muscle, with the particular density of someone who has spent their entire life at altitude doing physical things. Dark-skinned, dark-eyed, with close-cropped hair and a jaw that appeared to have been designed specifically for the expression of skepticism. He was wearing the kind of armor that did not announce itself, functional, unadorned, showing the considered wear of actual use rather than ceremony. He looked at her. He took in what she could see was a single comprehensive assessment: her pack, her weapons, her hunting clothes, the cut she'd acquired on the second day's climb that had almost finished healing, and the fact that she was standing on the perimeter of his territory without anyone's permission. Then he looked at her face. Then, to his credit, he did not dismiss her immediately. He walked to within speaking distance and stopped and said, with the measured directness of someone who has made an art of wasting no words, "You said the prophecy." "I did." "The Omega prophecy." "Yes." He studied her for another moment. "How old are you?" 17.
A beat.
"You want to march on the Grey King," he said. "I want to liberate every territory he's taken and dismantle his law, and give back to every Omega girl the birthright he stole from them. Yes. The marching is incidental." He looked at her for a long, even moment. Then something happened in his face that she had not expected, and which she found, immediately, deeply irritating. He smiled. Not a warm smile. Not an impressed smile. The smile of a man who has been told something so beyond the pale of reasonable expectation that the only available response is a kind of helpless, incredulous amusement. Then he laughed. It was a genuine laugh. Full, unguarded, the laugh of a man who rarely laughed but when he did gave it his whole chest. He laughed, and then he stopped laughing, and he looked at her, and his expression had settled into something that was still amused but was now also something else. Something that might have been, had she been reading it generously, the very early beginning of taking her seriously. "No," he said. She blinked. "I haven't finished. You don't need to. The answer is no. You haven't heard my—" "I have heard enough," he said pleasantly. "You are 17 years old. You have no pack affiliation. You have arrived on my mountain with a hunting knife and a prophecy, and you would like me, the alpha of the Iron Backpack, who has spent 15 years building this position into something that the Grey King has not been able to break, to throw all of that away on the strength of a story told by a girl who grew up in a passage room." She was quiet for a moment. "Vera told you about the passage room?" she said. "Vera has been sending messages for 20 years, he said. "I have been declining them for 20 years. This is not a new conversation." "And yet," she said, "you came out."
He paused.
It was brief, barely a second, but it was there. A fractional recalibration. "I come out for everything that presents at my perimeter," he said. "It's standard protocol." "I'm sure it is," she said. "And I'm sure you also laughed at the last 5 visitors and then turned them away in person instead of sending a guard. Standard protocol." He looked at her with an expression that suggested he had expected this conversation to be shorter. "Go home," he said. "I don't have a home to go to," she said. "I burned it down on my way out. Metaphorically. My parents are fine." A pause. "Probably worried, but fine." "Then go back to your parents. They'll ask where I've been, and I'll have to explain that I spent a month learning that I am the prophesied Omega Messiah, and then 2 days climbing a mountain to meet the man who was supposed to help me, and he said no. It would be an embarrassing conversation." He was quiet for a beat. "Are you always this exhausting?" he said. "I've been told I'm an acquired taste," she said. "It tends to be worth it." He looked at her. The sentinels on their various ledges and concealed positions, whom she was now certain were listening to every word of this, were very quiet. The wind came off the mountain and moved between them. "Go and eat," he said, finally, and there was something in his voice that was not invitation and not welcome but was also, precisely, not refusal. There's a meal hall. Don't touch anything that isn't given to you. Don't go past the inner perimeter, and don't speak to my people about prophecies. So I can speak to them about other things? I reserve the right to have you escorted off the mountain at any time. Noted, she said, and walked past him toward the settlement. Behind her, Selim Reese stood on his perimeter and watched her go with the expression of a man who suspects, with deep reluctance and very little pleasure, that this is the beginning of something. He was right. He would not forgive himself for a long time. Chapter 4. She slept in the outer hall on a cot they produced with the pointed efficiency of people who wanted to make clear that accommodating her was an imposition. She found this reasonable and said so, which appeared to confuse the man who had brought the cot. In the morning she was awake, before the first watch change. She had always been a pre-dawn person. She thought more clearly before the world was fully awake, when the light was the clean gray of possibility and the day had not yet decided what it was going to be. She sat in the doorway of the outer hall with her knees pulled up and watched the Ironback mountain pack begin its morning with the organized precision of something that had been doing this exact sequence for a long time and had optimized it without fanfare. It was impressive. She did not say this. She was watching the morning formation, warriors cycling through a drill sequence that she recognized in places and did not recognize in others, when Selim appeared beside her. He had clearly come to say something. He appeared to have run a brief internal debate about whether to say it. He said it anyway. You know the Thornwood defensive formation. She looked at the drill. 2nd and 4th positions.
Yes.
My pack uses it. You said you have no pack. I said I have no pack affiliation. I trained with the village warriors. They use it. He was quiet for a moment. The last 3 steps of the 4th sequence are wrong, she said. He turned to look at her. The body weight shift on the pivot, she said. It's backward. It gives you more power on the initial strike, but it leaves the left side open for longer than it should. I had it corrected 3 weeks ago.
She paused.
By a 71-year-old woman in a temple, if that's relevant. He looked at the formation. He watched the 4th sequence through twice. He said nothing. He walked over to the drill leader and said something in a low voice. The drill leader looked at the formation, ran the sequence, ran it again with the adjusted weight distribution, came back and said something to Selim. Selim said nothing to her. He walked back inside. This was how the next 10 days went. She did not ask to be included in training. She watched from wherever she happened to be, and she happened to be in a lot of places, because she moved through the settlement with the unhurried curiosity of someone who has not been asked to leave yet and is making thorough use of that fact. She watched the sentry rotations and understood the pattern within a day. She watched the supply management and noted, without comment, that it was slightly inefficient in the distribution of dry goods. She watched the pack's tracking team run a practice trace and identified, without being asked, where they lost the scent. She mentioned this last one. The tracker did not look pleased about it. She mentioned it anyway because there was no version of this situation in which it was useful to keep quiet about a tracking error that could cost lives in a real scenario. The tracker, whose name was Brennan and who appeared to have the default expression of a man who had decided skepticism was simply a more efficient way to engage with the world, tested her correction and, after a long pause that she chose to read generously, used it. By the 5th day, Brennan was asking her questions. By the 7th, she was running the morning trace alongside the tracking team with a naturalness that appeared from the outside to suggest she had always been there. Selim noticed this. He noticed it in the way that he noticed most things about her. Carefully, from a distance, with a controlled expression that disclosed very little and a set to his jaw that disclosed considerably more. He had not offered her a formal place in the settlement. He had not agreed to anything. He was doing the thing that she was learning he did with things that unsettled him, not engaging with them directly, but not dismissing them, either. Holding them at a controlled remove while he thought. She could work with that. On the 8th evening, he came to find her. She was in the outer courtyard, sharpening her hunting knife by the light of a small lamp, which was a thing she did when she needed to think with her hands. "Sit," she said, before he reached her.
He stopped.
She did not look up. "You know someone is behind you without looking," he said. "You walk like you own the ground," she said. "It has a distinctive sound. Sit down. You're making the courtyard feel supervisorial." He sat, with the slight deliberateness of a man accommodating a request that he hadn't quite decided to honor, but was honoring anyway. "You want to ask me something?" she said. "I want to understand something," he said. "There is a difference." "What would you like to understand?" He was quiet for a moment. She kept sharpening. "Vera," he said. "You trust her." "I trust what she showed me," she said. "The power is real. I've had it my entire life, and didn't know. I can demonstrate it if you need me to." "I don't need you to."
She looked up at that.
His expression was not quite readable. There was something in it that was not quite belief. Not yet, but the thing that precedes belief, when an honest person meets evidence they cannot easily dismiss. "You saw the correction in the formation," she said. "You tested it and it worked. Brennan's team ran the trace. My red was right. You've been watching me for 8 days and I haven't been wrong about anything yet. That's not the same as the prophecy being true." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But it's not nothing either." He looked at her for a long time. "If I agree to this," he said, "I am committing the pack. Every person on this mountain. Not just resources, lives. I would be committing them based on a prophecy. The testimony of a woman who has been alone in a forest for 30 years, and a 17-year-old girl who is considerably more competent than she is any business being." "Yes," she said. "That is accurate. That is an enormous amount of faith." "I know," she said. "I'm asking for it anyway." Another long silence. "Why me?" he said. "Vera has sent messages for 20 years. Why does it have to be this pack? Why does it have to be me?" She set the knife down. This question she had thought about. She had thought about it on the climb, and she had thought about it in the passage room years ago, metaphorically speaking, in all the gaps between things, all the spaces where she had not been able to ask the question because there had been no one to ask. She had turned it over many times, and the answer she kept arriving at was not clever or strategic. It was simply true. "Because Vera said you were the only one who could," she said. "And I think the reason you're the only one is not the alliance network or the supply routes or the tunnels under the king's fortresses, though all of that matters. I think it's because you've spent 15 years building something here that the Grey King hasn't broken. Every other pack, he either conquered them or corrupted them or crushed them into silence. You didn't let him. And I think whatever that is, whatever kept this place standing when everything else fell, I think that's what I need." He was very still. The lamp between them moved in the night wind. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, with a quiet that was not peace, but was the consideration of someone who is beginning, slowly and with great reluctance, to accept something. "I haven't agreed." "I know," she said. "I may not agree." "I know that too." He stood. He looked at her one more time, that long, measured look that she was learning to read the way you learn to read weather, not by the surface, but by what moved underneath. Then he walked away. 3 days later, he agreed. He called her to the map room on a gray morning when the cloud had come down low enough to sit on the summit, and the air tasted of iron and coming snow. The map room was exactly what it sounded like, a room containing maps, which was both obvious and insufficient as a description. The maps were extraordinary, not the crude territory charts the Grey King's administrators drew, but detailed, layered, obsessive documents built over decades, with annotations in 4 different hands, with measurements and distances and seasonal variations noted, with the kind of knowledge encoded in paper that only comes from people who have loved a place for a very long time. She looked at them for 10 seconds before she caught herself and looked back at him.
He was watching her look at the maps. "There are rules," he said. "There always are," she said.
"You do not speak to my pack about the prophecy, about the Omega Messiah, about liberation. None of it. You are a trainee on a military assessment. That is what you are in this place, to my people, until I decide otherwise. Because you don't want them committed to something you haven't decided on yet. Because they are my people, and I manage what they are committed to."
"Fair," she said.
"What else? You train under Brennan and the combat unit. You do not instruct, you participate. If they choose to take your corrections, that is their decision. Also fair. You share everything you know about the Grey King's interior defenses, the Valley territories, the Omega Mage Corps. Everything." "Yes. And you." He stopped for a moment, as though recalibrating. "You keep the power contained. I know about the Omega gift. I know what it is, at full force. Until we know what we're doing, you do not go beyond what you can control." She looked at him. "You're not afraid of it," she said. It was not a question. "I'm cautious of things I don't fully understand yet," he said. "There's a difference." "Everyone else in the world is afraid of it," she said. "The Grey King has built his entire law around being afraid of it." "I am not the Grey King," he said. A pause. "No," she said. "You're not." She extended her hand. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone being offered something they have not quite decided is safe. Then he shook it. His grip was exactly as solid as she had expected. "You're going to be insufferable," he said. "Almost certainly," she agreed. "But I'll be useful." He let go of her hand. He turned back to the map. "We start tomorrow," he said. "Brennan will meet you at the south gate at dawn." "I'll be there at half dawn," she said. "I work better before the world is fully awake. Half dawn is not a time." "It is for me." She was gone before he could respond. In the map room, alone with his charts and the long, slow weight of a decision made, Selim Reese pressed his hands flat on the table and stood for a moment in the particular silence of a man who has stepped onto a road that only exists because he has stepped onto it. He was not, he told himself, afraid. He was cautious. There was a difference. He was not sure in this moment that the difference was as large as he needed it to be. Chapter 5. Winter on the Ironback was not the gentle season. It was a season of hard edges and long dark and the kind of cold that removed all unnecessary things and left only what was essential. It was, Aelith thought, a very honest season. She found she liked it. Training began before light, most days. Brennan ran her through the Mountain Pack's combat doctrine with the thoroughness of someone who found incomplete instruction almost physically painful, and she worked through it the way she worked through everything, not just learning the forms but understanding the why beneath them, asking questions that Brennan initially found irritating and eventually found, in the grudging way of a man revising downward his estimate of how irritating something is, worth answering. She was good. She had always been good. But she was learning the difference between being naturally gifted and being actually trained, and the gap was instructive. Selim observed the morning sessions when he wasn't occupied with other command duties, which was most of them. He stood apart. He watched. He did not intervene, did not instruct, did not comment, except on 2 occasions in the 3rd week, when she was doing something that was technically correct and functionally insufficient, and on both occasions he walked over, adjusted her positioning without narration, and walked away. She waited until Brennan was otherwise occupied the next morning, and then said to Selim, who was standing near the south wall with the particular stillness of a man who has decided to pretend he is not paying close attention. If you're going to correct my form, you could say the words. I won't break. He looked at her. The form was fine, he said. The form was fine in open ground against opponents who follow rules, she said. You moved my back foot. That's a correction for close spaces, with irregular footing, which means you are thinking about the interior corridors of a fortified keep. He was quiet. You've been planning the approach to the main fortress, she said. Can I see? Another pause. Longer. After training, he said. She won that sparring session by a margin she had not previously achieved. She was fairly certain it was because she was relaxed. After training, he showed her the maps. This became, without either of them formally establishing it, the pattern. Training in the morning, the maps in the evening, the long, slow construction of a plan that was never finished because every answer revealed two more questions, and both of them were the kind of people who could not stop asking. She noticed things about him in this time. She noticed that he was, beneath the controlled exterior, extraordinarily meticulous. He kept his maps in a state of constant revision, updating conditions and positions from the pack's scouting reports with the attention of someone for whom imprecision was not merely inconvenient but wrong. She noticed that he ate breakfast at the same time every day, and that if anything disrupted this, he was slightly worse company for an hour afterward, which he was clearly aware of and slightly annoyed by. She noticed that he was kind to the younger pack members in a way that did not announce itself. No fanfare, no warmth he expected to be recognized, just the practical ongoing acts of someone who considers it his job to make sure the people in his care are all right. She noticed that he laughed very rarely and that when he did it was the real thing, the full-chest involuntary laugh from the first day, the laugh that was not performance. She made it her private and undisclosed project to produce that laugh at least once a week. She did not tell him this. On the evening of the first month, she asked him something she had been carrying since Vera's temple. They were at the maps, the lamp lit, the mountain wind doing its usual unreasonable things to the window frame. Why did you stay? She said. He looked up. On the mountain. The Grey King has never been able to break this place. Vera said it. I said it. But that's not enough of an answer. Every other pack, there were reasons. Fear. Isolation. Exhaustion. What was your reason? He was quiet for a long time. My father, he said, finally. He built this pack. He spent his entire life building it into what it is, and he died 4 years ago knowing the Grey King had never taken it. A pause. I am not going to be the man who gives it away. That's a reason to defend it, she said. That's not the same as knowing how. No, he said. That's why I learned how. She looked at him. There was something in his face in that moment that she did not often see there, not unguarded, exactly, because she was not sure Selim Reese had a mode of communication with the world that could accurately be called unguarded. But something close to it. Something that was the shape of the man underneath the armor. She looked away before he caught her looking. The wind knocked at the window frame. Same time tomorrow, she said. Same time tomorrow, he said. Spring arrived on the mountain in precisely the way it arrived everywhere else on the Ironback, which was to say, only barely and not apologetically, and with the strong implication that it would leave again if inconvenienced. The argument happened on an evening in the first week of the early thaw. They had been planning the approach to the Grey King's eastern corridor for 3 hours, and neither of them was wrong. Exactly, but the thing they were disagreeing about had the particular quality of disagreements that are not entirely about what they appear to be about. The south approach is exposed for too long, she said, for the 4th time, because she had said it 3 times before and he had adjusted his position each time without fully conceding, and she was beginning to find this characteristic of his mildly maddening. The south approach uses the cover of the ridge line, he said, for the 4th time. The ridge line breaks here, she said, indicating the point on the map with more precision than was strictly necessary. For a quarter mile. In daylight, which is when we'd be making this crossing because the northern side has different considerations after dark. I know about the northern side. Then you know the south approach exposes us at the worst possible point. I know, he said, with the quiet patience of someone who has been sitting on a correction for an hour and has finally decided it costs more to keep sitting on it than to say it, that you are right about the quarter mile.
She stopped. He looked at the map.
The south approach was the plan when we were thinking about a force of 30, he said. We are now thinking about a force of significantly more than 30, depending on how many of the Valley Pack contingents commit. A larger force changes the exposure calculation. The quarter-mile gap that is untenable for 30 becomes manageable, not comfortable, not ideal, but manageable for 90 with correct staggered movement. She looked at the map. She looked at the quarter-mile gap. She had been arguing the wrong version of his position. You didn't say we were thinking about 90, she said. You didn't ask how many.
You didn't, she stopped.
You are impossible. You are arguing a point that was already resolved in my head, he said without heat. You do this when you're tired. You solve things in order, and you assume the problem you're solving is the current problem. She looked at him. You've noticed that, she said. I notice most things. A pause. I'm not always tired when I do it, she said. No, he agreed. Sometimes you do it when you're frustrated about something you're not talking about. The lamp between them moved. She was aware, with a precision that she found inconvenient, of the exact distance across the table. And what, she said, carefully, am I frustrated about that I'm not talking about? He held her gaze for exactly the right amount of time to make the question land. I expect you'd know better than I would, he said. He rolled up the map with the methodical care of someone who has decided the evening is over. She did not stop him. When he left, she sat in the map room alone for a while and told herself, firmly and with great conviction, that she was not thinking about anything in particular. She was not sure she believed it. Chapter 6. She went back to the valley in the last weeks of spring. Not alone. With Selim and with Brennan, and with 4 other members of the mountain pack, whose primary function appeared to be making sure Selim had people around him who would tell him when he was being unreasonable. She had come to understand, over the winter months, that this was a considered arrangement on his part. He knew his own tendencies. He had designed his immediate circle to counterbalance them. She found this in the small private inventory she kept of things about him that surprised her, admirable. She had sent a message to her parents. The message said, I am alive. I will explain when I see you. Don't tell anyone about the passage room. Marin's reply had come back in 3 days and said, come home when you can. We have things to tell you too. She was working on when she could. The Valley Packs were in different states of despair. There was the Ashgrove Pack, in the Eastern Territory, who had lost 3 alpha males to the Grey King's purges and were currently led by a woman named Thessaly, who had been keeping her people alive through a combination of extraordinary organizational competence and a strategic willingness to be underestimated. There was the Milford contingent, fractured and leaderless since the conquest of the Southern Pass, operating as 3 loosely affiliated family groups who had not been a proper pack in 6 years. There was the remnant of the Blackwood Pack, the oldest in the valley, reduced to a dozen survivors living in the forest margins, with an elder named Costa, who is 90 years old and had the quality of someone who has survived every bad thing life has sent him and has therefore stopped being afraid of anything. They went to each of them, one at a time, on the ground, not with promises or proclamations or the sweeping rhetoric of someone who needed them to believe something before asking for anything. With maps and plans and the specific, practical language of people who were building something real. Thessaly of the Ashgrove Pack received them in the back room of a mill at dawn. She listened to the entire plan with the focused quiet of a woman who has learned that most things people present as solutions are not, and then she said, "Show me the Omega." Aelith stepped forward. I've heard this story before, Thessaly said. Not specifically. The shape of it, the prophecy, the Messiah, the liberation. Every few years, someone comes through with a version of it. They're usually charismatic. They usually mean well. They are usually dead within 6 months. I know, Aelith said. So give me a reason, Thessaly said. Not the prophecy. Not the power. Give me a reason to take my people out of the relative safety of the margins and put them on a battlefield they might not survive. Aelith was quiet for a moment. Because they're already dying, she said. Not on a battlefield. In the margins. Slowly. Without choosing it. You have kept them alive, Thessaly. I can see that. I can see exactly how much it has cost you, but alive is not the same as free. And I think you know, because you are not a woman who does not know things, that the margins will eventually be taken too. The Grey King does not leave edges. He consumes them.
She paused.
I am asking you to trade a slow certain loss for a fast uncertain one. That is not a comfortable offer, but it is an honest one. Thessaly looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Selim. And him, she said. He came down the mountain, Aelith said. Draw your own conclusions. Thessaly drew her own conclusions.
6 weeks, she said.
Give me 6 weeks to prepare. Don't show up before then, and don't count on me until the morning of the action. I understand. And if it goes wrong, Thessaly said, with the precise tone of someone establishing terms, not fear. I need to know there is an extraction plan. There's an extraction plan, Selim said. It was the first thing he had said in 40 minutes, and it came out with the particular weight of a man whose word about operational things has never needed decorating. Thessaly heard the weight of it.
6 weeks, she said.
Outside the mill, in the cold morning, walking back toward the horses, Selim said nothing for a while. Then, the extraction plan is incomplete. I know, Aelith said. You told her there was one.
There will be, she said.
We have 6 weeks. He looked at her. You are, he said, with the flat precision of someone accepting a characteristic they have stopped being surprised by, extremely confident for someone who is making things up as she goes. I'm not making it up, she said. I'm giving the problem 6 weeks to become solvable. That's the same thing. It really isn't. He was quiet for another moment. The extraction plan will be yours to design, he said. You have a natural gift for it. She looked at him. Was that a compliment? It was an operational assessment, he said. It sounded like a compliment. Don't read things into operational assessments. I make no promises, she said. He made a sound that was not quite a sigh, and not quite something else. She catalogued it privately and moved on. Chapter 7. The armies gathered in the valley in the last week of the season's turn. 93 fighters. In the end, the Mountain Pack's core unit, the Ashgrove contingent under Thessaly, the Milford groups unified for the first time in 6 years under a young alpha named Oren, who had turned out to have considerably more leadership capacity than his years suggested, and the 12 survivors of the Blackwood Pack with old Costa at their head, who had arrived carrying a sword that was older than most of the fighters assembled, and an expression of serene readiness that made everyone who looked at him feel, inexplicably, calmer. They camped in the forest above the valley floor, out of sight of the Grey King sentinels, and spent the last day running through the approach plan for the last time. Aelith moved through the camp in the way she moved through everything, present, deliberate, learning each person's name and something real about them, because she had decided early on that the people fighting beside her deserved to be known by the person they were fighting for. She knew Thessaly's second, a quiet woman named Develle, who had a daughter back in the margins and a gift for reading ground that she was obscenely humble about. She knew Oren's concern about his right flank, which she had already addressed by repositioning Brennan's trackers. She knew that Costa of the Blackwood had not slept well for 2 nights, and that this was, by his own account, because he dreamed about his dead, and they were very loud this close to their land being returned to them. She found Selim at the edge of the camp, sitting on a fallen tree at the treeline, with a piece of rolled parchment in his hands that he was not reading, and the particular quality of quiet around him that she had learned to recognize as the quiet of someone thinking very hard about something they have not said. She sat beside him, not too close, the right distance. She had become, over the months, very good at calibrating the right distance. "The plan is correct," she said. "I know. The formations are well drilled. The contingency sequences are memorized. The extraction routes are—" "I know," he said. "I know all of it. I helped make all of it." "Then what are you thinking about?" He was quiet for a moment. "The ones we're going to lose," he said. "I always think about them the night before. It is not something I have found a way to stop doing." She looked at the parchment in his hands. "What is that?" He looked at it. "My father's notes," he said. "His original pack records. The names of the first 40 people who came up the mountain with him when he was building." A pause. "He brought this out the night before every action. He said it was important to remember who you were before you were a commander." She said nothing. The campfire moved and shifted 30 feet behind them. Someone was laughing, Brennan, from the sound of it, which was unusual enough that she noted it. "I remember the first night you arrived at my perimeter," he said. "You laughed at me," she said. "I laughed at the situation." "You laughed at me," she said pleasantly. "It's all right. I would have laughed at me too." He looked at her. "I did not think," he stopped. Started again, with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. "I did not think you were real. Not as what you were claiming to be. I thought you were someone's pawn. Someone using the prophecy as a device. And now I think the prophecy chose correctly," he said, with the flat simplicity of someone saying a true thing and not embellishing it. She was very still. The treeline, the fire, the distant sound of the camp settling into its last night before the battle. "Selim." "Don't," he said. She looked at him. "There is a battle tomorrow," he said. "And there are things that should not be said the night before a battle because they are not fair to say when neither person can respond to them properly." She looked at his profile against the dark of the treeline. "What if we win?" she said. He was quiet for a long time. "Then there will be time," he said. She stood. She looked at him for one more moment, in the way she looked at things she wanted to remember, fully, without hurry, without apology. "Half dawn," she said. "Final position check." "I'll be there," he said. She walked back toward the camp. Behind her, Selim Reese sat in the dark with his father's notes in his hands and listened to the sound of the camp and thought about tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and all the days in some not yet certain future where the things that should not be said the night before a battle could be said instead. He thought about her. He found, and this was not a comfortable thought, but it was an honest one, and he had no patience for dishonest thoughts, that this had become a larger part of most of his thinking than was strictly strategically necessary. He looked up at the sky. The moon was full. Of course she was. "All right," he said, to no one in particular. "I see what you're doing." The moon said nothing. She never did. She only shone. Chapter 8. The battle happened on a clear autumn morning when the valley floor was still white with frost. This is not a story that needs a battle by the inch. This is not where the war lives. The war lives in the months of planning and the quiet evenings over maps and the extractions that worked because someone had spent 6 weeks making them work. The war lives in the choice 93 people made to step out of the margins and onto the ground and say, "Enough." The war lives in the decision a tired old king made 40 years ago to let his fear build a law, and in every Omega girl who had been stripped of her power by that law and had found ways to survive it, and in every village that had bent and not broken, and in a blind woman in a temple who had waited 30 years to give a secret to the right person. But here is what is important. It worked. Not easily. Not without cost. Thessaly's second, Devel, was injured in the first quarter of the approach, badly enough to be pulled from the action, not badly enough to be permanent. 3 of the Milford contingent were cut off from the main formation in the interior corridors and had to use the extraction route, which worked exactly as designed. Old Costa of the Blackwood was the first through the inner gate, moving with the calm of a man who had been waiting 90 years for this exact moment, and no one who was there would ever fully be able to explain how a man that old moved that fast. Aelith and Selim came through the final corridor together. They had not planned it that way. They had planned a divided approach. She through the eastern passage, he through the west, joining at the throne room entrance. The eastern passage had been sealed, recently and deliberately, and she had rerouted, and they had met in the dark of the central corridor with 12 feet of ancient stone between them and the throne room, and they had looked at each other in the torchlight, and there had been, in the fraction of a second before they moved, something wordless and enormous passing between them. Then they moved. The Grey King was on his throne. He was old. She had known he was old, 42 years of rule. The accounts had been clear about it, but Old described it without capturing it. He was ancient in the particular way of things that have lasted past their natural season, held in place by will and power and the sheer animal refusal to release what they had taken. He sat in the great chair of the iron Fong throne with his hands on the arms and his white hair loose on his shoulders, and his eyes, when they found her, those eyes, still sharp, still powerful, still afraid, went to her. He looked at her for a long time. "So it's you," he said. His voice was still the voice of command. 60 years of order had made it that. It still carried. "Yes," she said. "You're very young. You were very afraid," she said. "It comes to the same thing." He looked at her, past her, at Selim, at the soldiers in the corridor behind them. He was a man who understood numbers. He had always understood numbers. He understood in this moment exactly what the numbers in this room meant. "My mages," he said. "Secured," Selim said. "Before we entered the building." A silence. "The power," the Grey King said. And there was something in it, not quite defeat, not quite acknowledgement, but the specific exhausted quality of a man who has been afraid for 30 years and is finding that the absence of threat, even at its final hour, is a kind of relief. Is it what the prophecy said? She looked at him. She let him see it, not as a threat, not as a weapon, but as a fact. The full, undimmed, intact reality of what she was, what she had always been, what every Omega girl was, before the law and the fear and the stripping had taken it from them, the fire he had spent 30 years trying to extinguish. He closed his eyes. "The law is broken," he said. It was not a declaration of defeat. It was, she thought, something stranger, a man releasing something he had held too long. "Whatever else happens, the law is already broken." "Yes," she said. "It is." She was the queen of the valley by sundown. Not with ceremony, not with crowns or formal declarations or the orchestrated grandeur of thrones and speeches. With the simple, irreversible fact of being present in the place where power had lived, with the people behind her who had chosen to be there, with the word carried to every territory and every village and every mage station where an Omega girl's power had been filed in a ledger. It's over. The mages were given a choice. Most of them, stripped of the authority that had made them complicit, made the right one. The restoration ceremonies began the next morning. They were slow. They were imperfect. Some power could not be fully returned after years of suppression. Some could, and when it was returned, the expressions on the faces of the girls and women and mothers who had waited years to feel whole again, Those expressions would be the ones Aelith carried longest. She stood in the restored throne room on the third morning and felt, for the first time, something that she had not expected to be the thing she felt. It was quiet, not the silence with teeth, not the silence of waiting or fear or the passage room. Just quiet. The ordinary quiet of a morning in a room that was hers, with work still ahead and the world still imperfect, and everything changed. She breathed it in. Then she heard Selim in the corridor, speaking to someone in the particular tone he used when a logistical problem was requiring him to exercise patience. She went out to find him. Chapter 9. He came to her 3 days after the battle to say he was going back to the mountain. She had known this was coming. She had known it the way you know weather, not from a single sign but from the accumulation of small things. The way he had spent the last day reorganizing the mountain pack's interim protocol with Brennan, the way he had reviewed the supply chain back to the North Pass with the focused finality of someone completing an account rather than maintaining one. She was in the map room. She was always in the map room. The Grey King's maps were extraordinary. Decades of careful intelligence about every territory he had taken, exactly the kind of information she needed to begin undoing what he had done. She had been in there for 2 days and had barely started. He stood in the doorway. She did not look up. "You're going back to the mountain," she said. "My pack needs." "I know," she said. "Your pack needs its alpha. That's your first responsibility, and it always will be." "I'm not arguing." A pause. "You're not." "I'm noting," she said, "that the North Pass supply route is going to need restructuring, and that the alliance network you've been managing for 15 years is now the formal diplomatic backbone of a new territory arrangement, and that someone is going to need to manage that from the mountain end. I'm also noting that the map room here is significantly better than whatever you have up there, and that there is an open standing invitation for you to use it." She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression that she knew best, that she had spent 9 months cataloging in the private inventory she kept of him, the look of a man considering a thing he had already, carefully, privately, decided. "An invitation," he said. "Standing," she said. "Open. Entirely at your discretion." A long pause. "Aelith." "Selim." "There are things I did not say," he said, "the night before the battle. Things I specifically declined to say." "You said," she recalled precisely, "that there would be time. After." "There is after now," he said. She put the map down. She stood up. "I know," she said. And then, because she was not a woman who made people work for what was already true, "I know. I have known for a long time. I have been waiting for you to be ready to say it." He crossed the room. He had not touched her before, not beyond the operational, the sparring grip, the shoulder pass in the corridor. He had been, she understood, precisely that careful. He reached her, and he stopped, and he looked at her with the same quality of attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. Total, unperformed, honest. "You are infuriating," he said, "from the first hour." "You laughed at me," she said. "We've established this." "I laughed," he said, "because I had been waiting for someone to arrive and tell me that the years I had spent holding this position were not for nothing. And then you arrived, and you were 17 years old, and you had climbed my mountain without permission, and you were standing on my perimeter telling me the world was going to change," and he stopped. It was not a kind laugh. "No," she agreed. It was the laugh of a man who had just been handed the thing he had stopped believing would come. She looked at him. The map room. The lamp. The long morning light coming through the narrow window over the maps he had drawn and she had studied, and they had built a war from, together. "The thing you were waiting for," she said, carefully. "Or the person?" "Both," he said. As it turns out, she kissed him first. This was, she thought, appropriate. She had been doing most things first between the two of them for the better part of a year, and there was no reason to change the pattern now. He kissed her back without hesitation. This was also, she thought, him. Behind them, on the map table, the Queen's territory spread outward in all directions, unfinished, complicated, full of work and promise, and the long, slow task of making something new from something broken. Ahead of them, the mountain, the valley, the open standing invitation, the years. She pulled back. He rested his forehead against hers. This close, she could see everything his face usually did not show. Everything it was showing now. "You're going back to the mountain," she said. "Yes." "Come back soon." "I will." "Selim." "Yes." "You are," she said, with perfect and completely sincere sincerity, "considerably less insufferable than I expected." He laughed. "The real one. The full-chest involuntary one." She made a private note. 53 times over 9 months. This was the 53rd. She had, she thought, done well. Chapter 10. She went home in the last week of autumn. She had sent word ahead, enough that when she came through the village gate of Ashenford on a cold, bright morning with 2 mountain pack escorts and a horse she had acquired somewhere in the Middle Valley, the village did not react with fear. They reacted with the slightly stunned, slightly disbelieving, deeply heartfelt quality of people who have heard something extraordinary and are encountering the evidence of it in person. She did not stop at the village center. She went directly to the house on the edge of the market square, the loose stone at the base of a hearth. The passage room they had not opened since the spring she was 4 years old. Marin was in the doorway before Aelith had dismounted. She looked older. Not old. Marin was not yet 50, but older in the way that the last year had cost her, the months of not knowing, the weight of the message that said, "I am alive." "I will explain." The weight of explaining, in her silence, why that explanation had to wait. Aelith looked at her mother. Marin covered the distance between them in 4 steps. She held her for a long time. No words. Nothing that words were adequate for. Just the specific gravity of a mother and a daughter who had both been keeping things from each other and were very ready to stop. Edric appeared in the doorway behind his wife. He was older too. He had the particular look of a man who had spent a year in the company of a fear he could not act on, and a love he could not explain, and a decision made 20 years ago that had turned out to be, against all odds and at enormous cost, the right one. He looked at his daughter. She looked at her father. "Come inside," he said, in the voice that she had heard every night of her childhood through the passage room ceiling. The voice that had read her stories about the world she could not yet see. "You must be cold." She went inside. The kitchen was exactly the same. The weaving frame in the corner. The fire in the hearth. The window with the gray morning light coming through it sideways. She sat at the table. They sat across from her. "I want to hear it," she said. "Everything. From the beginning." They told her. She listened. The passage room. The twin she had never met, who had stayed and been stripped and died and been buried under a stone with no name. The mages. The years of terror and love braided so tightly together that neither of her parents had ever fully been able to separate them. The choice they had made before she was old enough to be consulted, and the cost of carrying it alone. She listened without interrupting. She had learned this, over the last year, the patience for the full shape of things, for the story to have its whole length before she began to respond to it. When they finished, there was a long silence. The fire settled. Marin pressed her hand to her mouth, the way she always did when things became too large. Edric's hands were flat on the table. "I know," Aelith said, finally, "that you did what you believed was right. I know you were afraid. I know the love it took to do what you did, to keep me hidden, to keep me safe, to carry all of that alone." She looked at both of them. "I am angry," she said, quietly and honestly. "I want to be clear about that. Not about the passage room. Not about the decision to hide me. About the years of silence after. About growing up believing I was something I was not, diminished, stripped, powerless, when I was not. I deserved to know myself. They said nothing. They had nothing to say. They had known this was true for years. And, she said, because she was not a woman who left things incomplete, I love you. Both of you. Completely. Whatever comes next. Maren reached across the table and took her hand. Edric's hands were still flat on the table. He nodded once, with the care of someone who is doing a thing very precisely because anything less precise is too likely to fall apart. Whatever comes next, Maren said. The kitchen was warm. The fire was lit. The gray morning light came through the window at the same sideways angle it always had. Outside, in the village market square, someone had taken down the Grey King's banner. Nobody had replaced it yet. Aelith thought. Good. They had time to decide what should go there. They had time to decide a lot of things now. That was the point. Spring came to the valley the way it always did. Slowly, and then all at once, and then with the particular abundance of a season that has had a very hard winter to follow and has decided to compensate. Aelith was in the restored throne room when she heard the gates. She heard them not with wolf senses, or not only with wolf senses, but with the ordinary anticipation of someone who has been half expecting a particular sound for 3 weeks and has been telling herself she is not waiting for it. She had been waiting for it. She took her time walking to the courtyard. He was there. The mountain pack escort, Brennan, with his default expression of skepticism, which she had spent the better part of a year learning to read as a form of affection. 2 horses she didn't recognize. And Selim. He looked the same. This was, she thought, comforting, not because she had feared he would change, but because there was something clarifying about seeing that the person you had been carrying in your head for 3 months was accurately rendered. The real version was exactly the remembered version. She had not, apparently, been embellishing. He saw her across the courtyard. He crossed it. He stopped when there was about 4 feet between them, which was the distance he always chose when they were about to have a conversation that required some degree of formality, and she had learned to read this the same way she had learned to read everything about him, not from a single sign, but from the accumulated evidence of months. The North Pass is restructured, he said. I heard, she said. Brennan sent a report. Brennan sent you a report. I asked him to. A beat. You're going to be extensively involved in the operational management of the mountain pack, he said. Only the parts that affect the Valley Alliance, she said. Which is most of them, but the principle stands. He looked at her. How is the work going, he said. Slowly, she said. And, correctly. It's going to take years. I know. There will be days when it's difficult. I know that too, he said. I've been thinking about the days after the difficult days. She looked at him. The days after the difficult days, she said. The ordinary ones, he said. The map room evenings. The half-dawn mornings. He stopped. There was something in his face that was not quite the unguarded expression, not quite the controlled one. Something navigating between them. You told me to come back soon. I did. I'm back. She looked at him for a moment in the bright spring morning of the courtyard, with the whole valley stretched out behind the gates and the mountain visible on the northern horizon, and the work of everything still to be done laid out in every direction. She had been told her whole life, explicitly or by implication, that she was too much, too loud, too present, too visible, too alive at a volume that attracted attention and caused problems. She had been told to be smaller, to be quieter, to be the thing that could be safely hidden. She looked at the man in front of her who had, over the course of 9 months, argued with her and corrected her and been corrected by her and built something with her and held things back and then, finally, said them, who had looked at every part of her at full volume and responded not with fear or management, but with the particular, careful, enormous attention of someone who understands that a rare thing deserves to be treated accordingly. "You're going to need better maps," she said. He almost smiled. "I'll bring mine," he said. "They're not as good as mine. They cover territory yours doesn't." "That's why we'll use both," she said. She turned toward the door. "The map room is in the East Wing," she said. "Come and look at what I've been working on. I've found 3 things in the Grey King's records that are going to change the entire Eastern approach to the restoration plan." She heard him fall into step behind her. She heard, also, after a moment, the quiet that was not absence but presence, the particular quality of someone walking beside you who is exactly where they're supposed to be. "I have comments on the Eastern approach," he said. "I know you do," she said. "You've already planned for my comments." "I've planned for your best 3, she said. "If you have more than 3, I'll be impressed." "I have 5. "Then I'm impressed," she said. "Tell me on the way." Behind them, through the courtyard gates, the valley lay in the ordinary morning light, not perfect, not resolved, still carrying the long memory of 42 years of gray, but lit now and known, and beginning, incrementally and imperfectly and entirely, to turn. Above them, in the blue depth of the spring sky, the moon was long gone into daylight. She was there, though. She always was, not visible, not announcing herself, but present in the way that things which have been patient enough to wait for the right moment are always present, satisfied, and still, and entirely unsurprised. She had spoken this into being 30 years ago. A girl in a passage room. A man on a mountain. A prophecy that was never a warning but only ever a promise, not of ease, not of simplicity, not of a love that cost nothing, but of something better than all of those things. Of 2 people who were exactly the right kind of impossible for each other. Of fire meeting stone and neither breaking. Of the Grey King's law, unmade. Of all the Omega girls, finding themselves whole. Of the doors that open when you have been still enough, patient enough, brave enough, to find them. The map room was warm. The lamp was lit. The maps spread wide across the table, the valley and the mountain and all the territory in between. And they sat down together and began.